there is a word called intensity, an extremely important training concept that's going to add inches to your vertical if you can leverage it properly in your training. What is it and how can you use it? Find out today in this episode of the THP Strength podcast.
I see what you did at the end there. At first, I was like, where the hell is this going? By the way, we don't rehearse any of this. There's no rehearse. There's very limited pre-production other than setting up our cameras
straight off my head.
Off the dome.
And
I just press play and he lets it rip. Anyways, we're talking about intensity. We're going to go in on what it is. How do you increase it? How do you decrease it? When should you do that? And why is it important? So, Isaiah, why is intensity important?
Because a lot of y'all out there are soft.
Oh, shit, I didn't expect that.
And guess what jumping is? Hard, the opposite of soft. And if you want to jump higher,
you want to get hard.
You got to get really hard if you want to jump really hard.
Yeah, exactly. So,
yeah. Specificity,
that's why it's important. You did a great job of describing that. So I'm going to try to maybe do the reverse of what you usually do, and I'm going to science-ify this. All right. So basically, your ability to jump is largely determined by your nervous system. This is probably not new to any of you, but you have your central and peripheral nervous system. Your central nervous system is like your brain and your spinal cord, and then your peripheral nervous system is the neurons that extend outwards. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pause this and we're back. All right. So I did, in fact, pull up a picture of what I'm talking about because I think it will be useful. So yeah, this is your central nervous system, your brain, specifically this, right? So we've got cerebellum, we've got the brainstem, we've got the cerebrum, midbrain, pons, medulla, spinal cord, right? And your motor function, which is like your ability to move, is controlled by some one function of each of these probably. And the more you go downward, you get more reflexive. So if you're functioning up here in your brain, there's some stuff that's probably involved in motor control. I don't know the brain that well off the top of my head, but I know the neurons well. And then the spinal cord is like more reflexive, like your stretch reflex is located there and things like that. This is probably also another really good diagram. Yeah, there you go. So then you also have parasympathetic and sympathetic nerves. We're not going to get into that. That's like a part of the autonomic nervous system, meaning it's like automatic and it's like the brake or the gas. We're just going to talk about the central nervous system. So then I'm going to type in, let's see, do we got structure? I don't want to do that. Let's type in neurons. There's the different parts of the brain and their functions, which I'm not going to go over. Anyways, so the brain is made up of neurons, and this is what your neurons look like. They are able to, and if you can't see this, it looks like, what would you describe this as, Isaiah? How would you describe this?
It's like a
spider,
like an organism with legs sticking out of it.
Yeah, and it's got a long tail.
Roots, and it's like roots.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So you got these dendrites here. They receive signals, and then they build up inside of this membrane or this like sarcoplasm, like neuroplasm. And then once it gets to a certain level, you have an action potential where it travels down the neuron, and it goes down into these synaptic terminals where it goes to the next neuron. And that's how we are able to communicate from one neuron to the next, is via these synapses. We also have these like little chemicals here as well. These chemicals are, what would you describe how this looks, Isaiah? To the listeners on our podcast, how would you describe how the terminal ends communicate with the dendrites via synapse?
Think of it as this pod sticking out of the neuron, and then the chemicals are like little balls coming out of the pods and into the next neuron.
It's almost like whenever in Dragon Ball Z they release the pods of the Saiyans out of the big ship.
Yeah.
It's like those little pods.
Or any space movie where they like shoot out the pod.
Yeah, to another spaceship. That's basically what it looks like. And so, yeah, they go from electrical to chemical signaling all the way down the neuron. And then they get to the end area. And then we have a muscle contraction. So that is.
So I have a question, John. When we describe an athlete as wired, or they're very neurally wiry. What does that mean? I feel like
so. This is actually like a beautiful. No, Oh, that's okay. This will work. So this is actually like a really good diagram for this. I wish I could make it a little bit bigger, but this maybe I can. Nope. So basically, we have a couple different things that are going to determine that. It's going to be one, the repolarization and depolarization of K, which is potassium moving in and out of the membranes during the action potential. And then we also have sodium, which is functioning to depolarize it because, again, we're going from an electrical to chemical signal. So what I just showed was a chemical signaling, but the electrical signaling, it's how fast and how sensitive you are to those different signals. There's also something called graded potentials, which if you look up, let me find real quick here. There are, just put this right here while I type this in.
I can pause it if you want.
No, it's all right. I got it. Graded potential, action potential. And so this is where your neuron is like building up this electrical impulse because chemicals, ions have like an electrical charge to them and they're moving in and out of the neuron. And what has to happen is, maybe this is a better diagram. Yeah. So what has to happen is there has to be a certain amount of depolarization, meaning, you're approaching neutral for there to be an action potential. So that graded potential is how that occurs. And so there's a small stimulus that causes a small depolarization of the cell membrane, and then a large stimulus causes depolarization. So once you have these graded potentials add up over time, you get a full action potential, which means that the neuron is sending its chemical or its electrical signal down its tail to the little roots that go to the little pods that we described. And the faster and the better you can do that, typically that means you're going to be more wired, right? So you have faster and more of that process happening at one time. And they're typically very sensitive to whatever the ions are that come in to signal a depolarization. Now, I think that they're called ESPs and ISPs. Physiology, and we'll see if this is the if this will explain it accurately. So there are excitatory postsynaptic potentials, and there's inhibitory postsynaptic potentials. So basically, the ESPs increase the excitability of the postsynaptic membrane, and they summate, which is what we just saw. That's like increasing closer to the depolarization happening. When that's really sensitive and they respond really quickly to these EPSPs, then that means you're wired. Now, if you have a lot of inhibitory, then that's kind of the opposite, right? Like in that case, you're probably going the other way. So it's EPSP, IPSP neuron. And this will be a good way to show it. And they're called neurotransmitters, but there's like specific ones. And so basically if you have, I don't know which screen is sharing, I guess it's this one. If you have more of those excitatory stimuli coming into the cell body, then you're going to get better transmission, right? You're more excitatory. If you have more of the inhibitory, postsynaptic potentiators, then you're going to get less force. That's partially why we call it potentiation. That's because we're actually looking at that happening more effectively. So that is kind of the why behind the what, because the what is why do we care about any of this? Is that's what increases, that's what makes you wired, like Isaiah said. That's what allows you to produce force really quickly. And when we do really high volitional activity, like if I said, Isaiah, pick this tree up as hard as you can, like uproot it, that would mean your brain is doing the activity I just explained like maximally. And this is also why when you guys see like little EMS units, the electrical myography signaling or whatever, and they put it on your body, on the muscle bot, like your skin, and then it tells you the electrical activity. That's what they're actually measuring. They're measuring the electrical activity that's coming from these neurotransmitters moving in and out of the neuron and the muscle. Well, it kind of starts at the neuron and then it goes to the muscle. So you're measuring that. That's how they're measuring the activity. Is there is this depolarization happening, and I could go more into that, but I'm not necessarily going to go too far into the weeds with that. But the more you're able to get the brain to produce force, and the more you're able to get the brain to volitionally activate all of these graded potentials that turn into action potentials that turn to an action, that turn to a muscle contraction when it gets to the muscle cell, the better you're going to generate force and the faster you're going to generate force. And there's a lot of other steps that I kind of skipped across the way. But when it comes to the central nervous system specifically, that's a pretty deep dive on the topic, I feel like, for what, the amount of time we have. And you have to manage that process very carefully when you're coaching jumping athletes, believe it or not. Because if you're someone like Donovan, he's someone that has probably a lot of this readiness to be excited all the time, right? Who knows for sure what it is, but along the way, something there is very sensitive and very capable of transmitting these impulses down the neuron to the muscle, and the muscle is very good at contracting very quickly relative to other human organisms. Whereas someone like Isaiah is maybe not naturally as capable as Donovan is. And people that are like really, really fast sprinters, they have like a very high sensitivity to it, and they're able not only to do that, but they also can have what's called cross bridging happen very, very quickly. And they can also cross bridge and detach cross bridging very, very quickly, which I will pause. And I was able to pull this up. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. But we're going to show you guys cross bridging. So cross bridging is basically the process that happens after that electrical chemical goes to your brain or down from your brain to the neurons, etc. And when that happens, what happens is myosin binds. Myosin is this like orange looking thing. It kind of looks like a nut sack, and it binds to this DNA looking chain of proteins, and it crawls. It basically the nutsack swings in one direction via ATP. This is why ATP is important. And the faster you can get it to do that swing and then detach, reattach, and swing again, the faster you were able to get muscle contractions to happen. So that's going to be related. This is why cross-sectional area is so important, because if you have more cross-sectional area, that means you have more of those binding sites and that swinging happening more forcefully and faster. But you also have to detach really quickly and reattach. And that's always happening unless you're like dead. And then you're in, what's that called, where you're like frozen when you die? Tetanus. Unless you're in tetanus, then it's not. They're just bound. That's it. It's done. No energy to detach them. So that whole process happening very, very quickly is also really, really important. And intensity allows us to train each of those physiological components better, to function better via stressing them, right? We are able to get more of those neurotransmitters into the brain or around the neurons or around the spinal cord or the peripheral nervous system all the way to the muscle more effectively. We're able to release more calcium, which allows for more cross bridging, and the cross bridging to attach and reattach, or detach and reattach very, very quickly, which allows us to have very, very high muscle contraction forces that moves the lever system that is our bone. So that is why intensity is so important, and intensity is really defined as how hard you are, as Isaiah said. But I actually define it as if it's a multi-joint movement versus single joint movement, if it is fast versus slow, if it has a high load on the bar versus a low load on the bar, and if it's a full range of motion versus a small range of motion. So a multi-joint movement that's full range of motion that happens very fast with high loads. Isaiah, what did we talk about yesterday that would fall into that category?
Power cleans.
Olympic fucking lifts. Yeah. Another one would be like if you did full squat jumps, but you had like a pretty heavy load on it and you were doing full range of motion squat jumps. Like that would be another really intense exercise. Now there's other ways you can increase intensity. Like technically you can do it spatially, which means like the range of motion you can increase. So if you increase the range of motion, yeah, technically that increases the intensity. You could do, a single joint versus multi-joint. So if you're doing something involving your ankle, knee, and hip, which is triple extension, which is so important, that's also going to increase intensity. But you could also do something like changing the velocities that you're working with, because that's also going to change ultimately the force or the load on the activity. So for example, if I do a depth drop off like a 60-inch box and I land in a quarter squat, that's going to actually be more intense than landing in a full squat. And so it also comes back to force. It's not necessarily just range of motion. Now, if I would land in a full squat, then that would be really intense. Like if I contacted my feet touch the ground in a full squat, that'd be fucking insane. Usually what happens is people dissipate it, as their foot touches down in an eighth squat, they go to a quarter squat, they dissipate force. They go to a half squat, they dissipate force. They go to a 2/3 squat, they dissipate force. They go to a full squat, they dissipate force. All the force is gone. And then they'll go into a fucking sissy squat with no force at body weight. Now, if they touched down in a stiff position and dissipated all the force in an instant in a sissy squat, then I would be impressed. But
Bye
no
bye
one did that.
meniscus.
What's that?
I said bye-bye meniscus.
Oh yeah, your shit will tear. Actually, legitimately, it would tear. So that's really important to understand. Is it's not necessarily just like with a barbell intensity. Like sprinting is really intense. Why? Because you're using every single muscle. Those detachment and reattachment rates are insanely fast. Your nervous system is doing that. EPSP and IPSP is like maxed out almost as fast as it can be. You're getting, yeah, like I said, the coordination of which muscles are turning on when is happening incredibly fast. It's almost every single muscle in the body. So that's also going to work to your benefit. And the total forces that you're seeing at touchdown, like the eccentric forces, even like upright sprinting, you're technically landing in an 8th squat or like a 16th squat or whatever at the knee. You're also getting 5 times body weight very, very quickly, which means the rate that the force is increasing is really, really important as well. So it's not just like, well, why are powerliftings like powerlifters, are they more intense than only lifters? I would say that velocity is probably more important than the load to a point. Like you still need a mass. And if the mass is so low, like if it's hand speed, if you're throwing a jab, that's really intense actually. It's still single joint. So it's not like, that's why guys can go 5-minute rounds versus like, you're not going to see someone do fucking, wow, CrossFitters would do this, but you're not going to see someone do 300-pound snatches for 5 minutes straight. Like you're not going to see that. They can do it once, like, but they're not going to do like on repeat. Or if they do it, they need to build in rest in there, right? Or like take their time to recover because intensity is higher. So yeah, that's in terms of how it affects jumping. It's because jumping is using all of the same physiological processes that I just explained, through the neuron and the muscle. That's always happening when you do anything where a muscle is contracting, realistically. But where you're doing it fast and having like a forceful intent, that's what makes it specific. And so intensity in the weight room allows you to train those physiologically very specific activities. And how I defined intensity is like, multi-joint. Are you going fast? Are you going slow? Is it a lot of weight? Is it a little bit of weight? That is the reason that I came to that conclusion, or my mentor came to that conclusion, is because of the underlying physiology, because of what's happening to all of those underlying components. And jumping falls into that category. Like distance running, you're not going to get nearly as high of velocities. So you're not going to get as much of the underlying components that allow our muscles to contract to be as violent when it happens. So yeah, that's intensity. You want to generally see intensity. Actually, you know what? I'll ask Isaiah this. Isaiah, what do you want to see intensity do? And how would you increase intensity in a squat over 6 months? What would you do?
You generally want to see intensity go up as you go cycle to cycle. The downside of too much intensity, by the way, is that's riskier. with intensity comes a higher risk of injury.
Like your belt squat at 500 pounds today?
I'm a man of many mysteries. You won't know until later.
I'm actually terrified.
Yeah. How I would increase intensity cycle to cycle, I would probably very early on, I would do deep squats at higher rep ranges, lower weights, and then I would decrease the range of motion, which is interesting because you were saying bigger ranges of motion.
They're typically more intense. However, what changes when you decrease the range of motion?
The weight goes up
a lot. And what else goes up? Ideally, if you could.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Velocity, brother.
Oh,
go
yeah.
faster. Like make
Yeah.
the weight go up and go faster. Yeah, you have to. Something has to give at that point. I mean, hell, dude, if I could have you fast squat 500 pounds, I would.
Yeah.
You would just die.
Yeah.
Intensity can only go so high. I can only put so much weight. Yeah, he can quarter squat. What could you say? He's 600 pounds. But if I said, Isaiah, I want you to half squat this fast and stand it, you don't even have to stand it back up. Just lower it fast.
Like one of the most
snap.
one of the most intense squat variations I had done was the quarter squats. Quarter squats with 100% of your deep squat max, but drop into the bottom of
like
the rep.
The rhythm ones.
Yeah, where it's like, well, it was literally like, and then like go
exactly.
up,
and stand up.
go up.
Is there a video of that somewhere, like on your Instagram?
Yeah, It's
Is
on
that
it's on
from
my
Los
YouTube,
Altos?
actually. Time skip.
Eh.
Bam, we have time skipped to the exercise I was talking about. So here I was doing a
I think
superset.
those quads. Did you shave your legs?
Nah. Oh, wait, actually, this was after I tested 50. So I'm literally dropping into the bottom of the rep as best I can with 100% of my max. And then what was crazy is I was supersetting this with depth jumps. Um, what's really interesting is this cycle trashed my bounce. Like I unloaded from that training cycle and I could not jump high. So
No, you jumped decent. You jumped 49 and a half, I think, with Billy.
yeah. No, but I had a dunk show too, and like I was just trash. My bounce didn't like climb back up until like a month after that training cycle.
Oh, we got to go back to the other view here. Yeah,
That was a while ago, so it's hard for me to remember exactly what it was. But I do remember after that, we were like, oh, elastic work is not going to help. It's supposed to actualize and help, but it doesn't. And this was a big lesson in fatiguing. Like when things get really specific in the weight room or in the training, it has to become less specific in other areas, right? Like,
Yeah.
or sorry, let me say that again. When it gets really specific in the weight room and you start getting specific in plyos, that means that your quality you're trying to improve is going to get worse short term.
Yeah.
And then as you back off and you unload, then it typically gets better. Like when guys tell me my vertical is going down, what's happening? And then I look at their training and I'm like, yeah, you've been doing fucking specific volume for like 3 or 4 months. That
Yeah.
makes sense. But if you stop doing that for a period of time, typically guys will PR their power clean. They'll do doubles and PR their power. Like someone texted us the other day in the group chat and was like, I am only supposed to work up to a heavy single, or I'm only supposed to work up to a heavy double, but I think I could PR and double it. And I was like, yeah, that's what happens when you back off. Like all the systems I just explained, basically, when you're training, you have what's it's called oxidative stress. Oxidative stress it's like I could be wrong about the description of this because it's biochemistry, but it has to do with like a radioactive, or not radioactive, something active oxygen that is like a hot knife through butter. And when you do that, it slices through membranes, proteins, everything. It doesn't give a shit, dude. It is so destructive to the body. And that oxidative stress is what allows us to actually adapt. It's what allows our body to recover. Like the adaptation process in the body is pretty incredible. And as we recover, and that's why protein's so important to take in, and why I'm like, if you're a vegan, you're probably gonna fucking struggle to recover. And our body can't handle that well. There's only so many amino acids it can make on its own. And when that oxidative stress happens and it cuts through all that stuff, you're not going to create forces fast. Like you're just not. You're not going to generate forces fast, whether it was because you've got more of these inhibitory postsynaptic synapses, or maybe it's that you've got more damage to the myosin and actin, or you've got disruption to like releasing calcium. Like we don't really know. There's a calcium ion related fatigue mechanism that Chris Corfus has like discussed a lot. And, that's a potential mechanism. We don't fully know, actually. It's kind of interesting. We don't know what the driver of fatigue is, but this is our best guess in terms of physiology. And so when you back off all that stuff, and this is kind of comes back to intensity, is that as intensity gets too high and this starts to happen, you get too much destruction to your internal biology, you have to let it recover. And sometimes that takes longer for like one person versus another. Like research will say, well, it's 14 days. Hey, newsflash, buddy. It's not always 14 days. Sometimes it's a month. Sometimes it's 2 months. Like it depends on the amount of internal destruction you did and how much time you need to recover. And it's not like bodybuilding where you could just fucking take steroids and you can overcome that in like 24 hours or 48 hours. Like some guys will gain 30 pounds in 6 weeks. And I'm like, dude, I've been training for 3 weeks, the last 3 weeks consistently. That would mean I would have gained 17 pounds. And I've been lifting for 3 times a week, multi-joint movements, following every rule in the book. Right. And I didn't gain a pound. I lost weight. And I'm well trained. Right. So how would you do that? Yeah, it's definitely going to be on gear. Unless you're grossly detrained. Even then, even if you're grossly detrained and you train for 6 weeks, I would not expect that to happen. Like at the 3-week mark, you're going to gain 17 pounds. No fucking way. There's no way. I just finished 3 weeks of training. Isaiah just finished 4 weeks of training and he probably didn't gain a pound. Even if he was grossly detrained, he might gain 5 pounds, not 35 or 15. So That said, that can kind of super compensate for it. And what happens is it signals for muscle protein synthesis to happen regardless of any other process going on in the body. Like your body could be deprived of fucking everything. And if you're taking enough, androgenous anabolic chemicals or compounds in your body, it's going to create muscle regardless. It doesn't care. And that's how bodybuilders get so lean and so big so quickly, and they're able to recover. Typically, what will happen though, or what can happen, is their force generating capacities go down. And you'll see this a lot. Like there's a lot of huge dudes in the gym that are pretty weak. And the reason for that is because they're not prioritizing intensity in their training, true intensity, right? Like maybe they do a heavy set of 10 for bicep curls, but I didn't see them do a single for a bicep curl as heavy as they could, or like a row, a max out row, or a max out back squat, like some guys do. Who's the bodybuilder that is like, yeah, buddy?
Ronnie Coleman.
Yeah, Ronnie Coleman did. Like, and he was strong, but most of them, that's why there's like such a deficit. You can see huge guys that they're strong, but relative to their body weight and their size, they're not that strong. So I feel like it's a good place to stop. It's a good long conversation about intensity. I did enjoy this. I'm a nerd. I love physiology. If you guys are like me and you love the science behind it, keep listening, tune in, like, comment, subscribe. And also, if you're an athlete and you're like, why am I doing this? Ask if you're one of our athletes. And if you're not and you want to know, then you should probably go sign up. And you can do that at THPStrength.com, where we'll coach you, and everything on the training is backed by science, because we're men of science.
Yeah. Engineers, if you will.
Engineers of flight, if you will. All right. We'll see you guys.